Okay, so hello, my name is Annie Humphrey, and I am a doctoral candidate in history at Trinity College, Dublin. I made this presentation for my department's weekly lecture series, which was extended into the summer of 2020 during lockdown. My original was meant to be recorded, but we had an error, so I'm recording it now to upload for YouTube, for both the original audience of Trinity students and the wider public. I made this presentation to introduce medievalists and medieval historians trained in Irish styles of documentary analysis to the sagas of Iceland. Undoubtedly, you've heard of them and have maybe even read or analyzed an exemplar in prior work. But unless you've been trained in Old Norse literature, you might feel intimidated or confused by the genre as a whole. The original announcement within our department included a copy of a short text, the tale of Thorstein's Staffstruck, which will be referenced towards the end as a sort of saga in miniature. But if you didn't get a chance to read it, there will be enough of a synopsis to follow along. Now, I've given several versions of this workshop to a lay audience, introducing them to what exactly the sagas are and how to access them for cheap or for free. This is my first presentation for an already academic audience, and I hope that it's useful without being patronizing. As for myself, I've been reading and writing about the sagas for 15 years. I wrote a thesis about the Icelandic depiction of Irish and Scottish characters in 2009 at Rutgers University. I've also designed and helped run several iterations of Old Norse boot camp at Worcester State University in Massachusetts. Because of that, there's a certain fluency in dealing with Icelandic literature that I'd like to share. If, for example, I was called on to talk about Spanish or Italian or Bulgarian medieval literature, let alone anything outside of Europe, I'd be scared to even start. So it's my goal today to bring you into a basic understanding of the genre as a whole, and hopefully inspire you to sample or even bring the sagas of Iceland into your study. So I made this meme as a sort of a sign of what I don't want you to be like. Don't be scared. Snorri, just for your information, was a prolific 13th century Icelandic author, and I promise I'll point out some stuff that he's done during the presentation. So this virtual saga workshop is first going to discuss what Old Norse literature means as a whole, and where the sagas fit into the genre, as well as how the sagas are further subdivided. Next, I'll bring up some key similarities between medieval studies in Iceland and in Ireland. Then I'll introduce us to how to pronounce things in Icelandic, so you don't feel intimidated by titles, character names, settings, or other elements of the sagas that you may wish to discuss. And then after a quick overview of how to access the sagas, including Old Norse editions, we'll take a look at the tale of Thorstein's Staffstruck and the larger Icelandic social history that affects its interpretation. Finally, I'll show you how to write about medieval and modern Icelanders, as their names are a little different from what we're used to. Then in the original, I was happy to take questions, but now you'll have to write a YouTube comment if you have any questions. So Old Norse was spoken across Northern Europe in the 9th through 12th centuries by mostly pre-literate peoples. It's split into Western and Eastern variants, which became modern Icelandic and Norwegian, and modern Danish and Swedish, respectively. There's some other smaller languages like Faroese that are also a part of this. The vast corpus of vernacular written material we have from the 12th century on comes from Iceland. So when we say Old Norse, it's really in essence an Old Icelandic language. Sometimes we say Old West Norse because there is some material that comes from what's now Norway, but you won't go wrong calling it Old Norse or Old Icelandic in a literary discussion. You might get in trouble with philologists, but you'll be just fine as a historian talking about literature. So Old Norse literature, primarily we think of the sagas. We've got the sagas of Icelanders. Icelandingasagur is how you can say it, or you can just say sagas of Icelanders or the family sagas, because these tend to talk about a single family through generations. Sometimes they're more region-based, but family sagas is a good catch-all term for probably the most famous sagas. Probably the most famous saga is Njal Saga, or also known as Brennu Njal Saga, meaning the saga of burnt Njal. It's so popular that Icelanders have their own word for it, Njala. It's a very beloved saga with quite a lot of stuff about legal proceedings. So it's a very interesting medieval document. Another really popular saga is the saga of Egil Skallagrímsson, or Egil or Egil saga. You can say Egil saga, Egil saga. We'll talk a little bit about Icelandic pronunciation in a bit. And then my personal favorite is the saga of the people of Laxardal, which literally just means Salmon Valley. Laxdela saga. That's a really, really cool saga. I mean, they're all really cool. They all have neat things going on with them. But there's some really incredible character development, and really interesting concepts of romance and life and just it's a really interesting window into a medieval mind in terms of its literature that it provides. So that's just some examples. There's plenty more of family sagas. We've also got legendary sagas and tales, which are like shorter versions of it. So the Saga of the Volsungs is a very popular legendary saga, as well as the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, which is supposedly what Vikings is based on, but my feelings about Vikings is a whole nother thing, but it is at least a famous saga. And the saga that the that we'll be looking at later, the Vale of Thorstein Staffstruck, is one of these that are just sort of like a little saga in miniature. Furthermore, there's the king sagas, and we do have some examples of this from Norway. So sometimes you see it spelled the Icelandic way, some the Norwegian way. And these were basically written sort of to curry a king's favor, to place a royal family in the larger scheme of history. The most famous of this is Heimskringla, which is, people just refer to it even in English as the opening lines, Heimskringla, because it means the circle of the world. What a beautiful thing to call a text. There's also the history of the kings of Norway. Now, outside of the sagas, you do have other Old Norse literature, the most famous of which are the Eddas. We have the Poetic Edda, which is this collection of poems which are obviously written by literate, thus Christian people, but there's some really interesting stuff in these poems, and some cool research has been done to suggest that some of these poems are a lot older than when they were written down. So there's some really cool Old Norse poetry existing in the Poetic Edda. And there's also the Prose Edda, also known as the Snorra Edda, and I'll get to why in just a moment. And then outside of the Eddas, you also have homily books. One from Iceland, one from Norway. And again, as medievalists, we know most of your literature is going to have a Christian component to it. And so these homily books, of course, are a great example of the vernacular language. So I told you I would tell you who Snorri was. So the three arrows show that he was definitely the author of Heimskringla, and he was definitely the author of the Prose Edda, which is known as Snorra Edda, Snorri's Edda, because he definitely wrote it. And then based on his writing style and some other stuff, we think that he might have written Eyitt Saga as well. But I'm not a philologist. I'm not going to stick my neck out. Just you were afraid you didn't know who Snorri was. Now you know he's the author of at least 2, possibly 3 of these texts. So let's take a look at Iceland and Ireland. So both are island nations who underwent medieval as well as modern colonizations, and then finally achieved full independence in the 20th century. Both have plenty of domestic grazing animals to make parchment out of. You need a certain quantity of cattle in particular. You can make sheep, I think even goat. You can make vellum out of. But certainly if you're going to be doing a lot of writing, you're going to need a lot of animal skins, and both Iceland and Ireland have a lot of grazing animals to provide that. So possibly because of this, both had medieval and early modern dedication to literature, to vernacular literature, to producing manuscripts, the very act of making a manuscript, as well as recopying those manuscripts over time. But because they were colonized islands, many of these manuscripts ended up off the original island. And of course, you know, Ireland has a considerable amount of its work in Ireland, but there's still some overseas in the UK and in Brussels. Iceland as well has gotten quite a lot of its manuscript back, the Arne Magnusson Institute. But there's still some of it that's overseas in Denmark, Norway, in private collections as well. That's another place where the manuscripts have gone. Another really important thing that both Iceland and Ireland share is that they both use a language that's spoken by relatively few people worldwide, but you know, is a living language. It has its own living culture and its own expressions. You know, it's this is the point where my Irish colleagues always get a little nervous because you know, I do use Irish myself. I'm not fluent, but I do use it as much as possible. And the way Irish is used and spoken on Ireland is a bit complicated, especially in Dublin. Whereas in Iceland, everybody speaks Icelandic. It's a bit more of a daily universal language on Iceland, but there are a lot fewer Icelanders than there are Irish, so it tends to be about the same number of people using Icelandic, using Irish on a day-to-day basis. And I should mention that Iceland has an incredible publishing industry for the size of their island, for the number of people who speak and read Icelandic. They put out so many books, so much fiction, so much incredible stuff. Even, you know, every year they put out so much material in Icelandic. Really, really cool stuff. So, you know, because of all these reasons, Icelandic history can seem really impenetrable. Like, oh, there's just so much going on, I'm never going to be able to get into it. But as an Irish historian, as somebody who understands the history of Ireland and the idiosyncrasies of Irish literature, you can apply a lot of what applies to Irish source material to studying Icelandic sources. Don't be scared, it's just unfamiliar. It's not that difficult. So let's talk about how to pronounce Old Norse. So people who speak a language that's descended from Old Norse are going to naturally pronounce Old Norse with the conventions of their dialect. So, you know, I can tell right away when someone's talking if they're from Denmark, from southwestern Norway, you know, as they quote Old Norse, as they talk about sagas, as they play music, sing Old Norse, you can also hear it as well, because they naturally are going to use the version of the language that they speak naturally will be Old Norse. For those of us outside of Scandinavia, though, sticking with the Icelandic pronunciation is the safest bet. So we're going to take a quick look at how to study and how to pronounce modern Icelandic. And that will help us learn how to pronounce Old Norse titles and names and stuff with confidence. Don't worry, the fact that you speak English, you know, gives you a pretty good start. It's I definitely think that Icelandic is more intuitive for English speakers than Irish is. Just because they're both Germanic languages, but there are a lot of little things that might trip us up. So let's take a look at Icelandic pronunciation. So, you know, we have pre-Great Vowel Shift sounds, a, e, o, u, that we find in pretty much all other Germanic languages, Romance languages, so on and so forth. It starts getting interesting when we throw the accents on Icelandic. We've got the accented A is ow, so hjá is the word here. A is an accented E. Both a long I and a long Y make an E sound, so vitki. O is with an accent is O, so Jon is the name. U, plain U, short U, I add because it actually, it doesn't have like a Y sound in front of it like we have in a lot of English. So this word up is it's not up, it's up. Like it almost sounds like a German U with an umlaut. So instead of up, it's up. Then a long U with an accent makes an oo sound, so hus. Icelandic also uses the AE ligature, which is makes an I sound, and it also uses O with an umlaut, which makes an sound. So Æsir and hug is this word struck, which we will see in our tale of Thorstein Staff struck. And then two more diphthongs, which might surprise us as English speakers. AU makes an oi sound, so lawyer, instead of logger, lawyer. And EI makes an A sound, so heim, einar, svein. The Norwegian or the German thing would be to say heim, but heim is how you do it in Icelandic. So as with Irish, Icelandic may seem strange or counterintuitive, but it's consistent, and you can always look for pronunciation audio or video online. Let's take a quick look at some unfamiliar consonants for English speakers. Now, we as medievalists have a massive advantage because we've seen thorn and eth before, these two th sounds. We recognize them from Middle English. So they're alive and well in Icelandic. There is technically a difference where the thorn is voiced and the eth is not voiced. But you're not really going to notice that, particularly since et only appears within a word. It never starts a word. So Thor and Odin. You might be able to hear that you're putting a voice Thor, Odin. Again, it's not that big a difference. It's how you're gonna naturally pronounce it by where it is in the word. So thorn and eth are still an accent. H and V makes a KV sound, kv. So kvita, meaning white. Kvita, not hvita, but kvita. For some reason, I've never quite figured out why. So if someone wants to give me a comment or whatever for exactly why a medial F, when it's in the middle of a word, it makes a P sound. So it might look like you're flying into Keflavik, but it's actually Keflavik. You say Nefn, Hepna. I never quite figured that one out. So someone, I know P and F can get a little interchanged in Germanic languages, but I've never heard why specifically Icelandic preserves this medial F making a P sound. G, when it's in a word or at the end of a word, is a nearly voiceless Y. We already saw A here, and here Saga. So it's nearly voiceless. It's sort of a back of the throat kind of sound. J, as in a lot of Scandinavian languages, a lot of Germanic languages, it makes a Y sound, so sjö here. And then R is at the end of a word particular is kind of like it occurs a lot deeper in the mouth than it does in English. I think the technical term for that is vocalic rather than erotic, but not a philologist. Either way, so instead of mather, it would be mother, like it happens back here, mother. And we'll see this finial R in a couple of places because it appears on the nominative form of quite a lot of words. And V, believe it or not, is actually a V sound for us English speakers. You don't make a W sound. So the largest town just outside of Reykjavik is Kópavogur, not Kópavogur, but Kópavogur. See, I'm pronouncing my G's. It's hard to turn that off as an English speaker. And then possibly the weirdest one, just in terms of how unexpected it is, the double L in Icelandic makes a TL sound. So this guy that in English we would say Egil, they would say Egill. The big waterfall, Gullfoss, the god Heimdallr. It's a very strange thing, but now that we know, we can use that knowledge to pronounce the name of this this glacier, technically the glacier itself, but it was the volcano underneath this glacier that caused all the problems in 2010. And everybody just saw this pile of words or pile of letters and freaked out and was like, oh no, I cannot pronounce this. We can work through it syllable by syllable. It's one letter more than Balaklia. And if we can figure out Balaklia, we can figure out this word. So just Aya Fjatla, because remember they got double L, Jökull. Aya Fjatla Jökull. It's a mouthful, but it's not unpronounceable. Quick note on the Icelandic alphabet itself, in case you're trying to look up words. The really important one is that for whatever reason, in Irish dictionaries, you'll have a fada right next to a. So, you know, you might have something a fada, a fada again, like it sort of, it swings in and out, whether it has an accent or not. It's not that big a deal in Irish dictionaries, but in Icelandic dictionaries, they treat them as completely different letters. So if something starts with an accented A, you're gonna have to go to the accented A section. It won't be under A. The thorn, the ash, and the umlaut O all appear at the end of the alphabet, but for whatever reason, F comes after D. Never quite figured that one out. Thorn is written TH in English orthography. The F sometimes is DH, but most of the time it's just D. So Thora becomes Thora in English when we're writing it out, not using a special keyboard or whatever, and Gudrun becomes Gudrun when we're writing it out in English. C, it was eliminated from the Icelandic language. Notice that they have no more C. They said, no, we can just use K or S. We're not going to keep up the C business. So it's only used when necessary for European standards, such as centimeter or C for city center on road signs. And Z also was eliminated from the Icelandic language, but not that long ago. In 1973, they decided they would just use SK instead of Z. But it is still used for foreign words and older institutions, including Iceland's Fornrít, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and this hot dog stand, which you're probably wondering, why is there a hot dog stand in the middle of this slide? Well, if you ever go to Reykjavik, you have got to go to Beirin's Bestu Pulsar, which is the town's best hot dog. It was founded in 1939, so they get to keep that Z on their sign, and it really is the best hot dogs in the world. I didn't believe it when my kinsman went to Reykjavik and said he was eating hot dogs all the time. I'm like, why would you go to Reykjavik to eat hot dogs? Turns out they're amazing. So definitely stop by, admire the Z, which is no longer seen in new Icelandic work, and enjoy the hot dogs. So Íslensk Fornrít, old enough that it gets the little Z. It was founded in 1928. It was founded to publish critical editions of the sagas in Iceland. Before this, it was German or Scandinavian publishers who set the standard for sagas. And in 1928, they said, no, you know, this is our heritage, this is our culture. We want to put out really, really good editions of the sagas. And so we're just gonna have to do it for ourselves. So because of that, it is the absolute gold standard of saga editions today. Unfortunately, though, it's very difficult to get in print outside of Scandinavia. If you go to WorldCat and you look for the nearest one to Trinity College, you get Denmark. So not very convenient, but I do hear that Professor Ruth Mazo-Karas is pushing for Trinity to get their own copy of Iceland's Fornrít. So I'm really, really hoping. We'll see. And so the books have the explanatory material in modern Icelandic, and then they have the edition. Their primary editors are these three names here. There are more, but Guðni Jónsson, Einar Ól Sveinsson, and Jakob Benediktsson are sort of the big three names. So if you see one of these names as the editor on something that you find online, 99% of the time it's going to have come from Íslensk Fornrít's publication. And so what's really, really cool is they use regularized but not modern spelling. And so sometimes when, or most of the time when you find an Old Norse saga online, it's actually in modern Icelandic spelling. And the quickest way to distinguish that is that medieval uses just an R, whereas the modern uses UR on many nominative forms and names. For example, in the medieval form would just say mather, the modern will say mather. I mean, it's pronounced the same, just, you know, the modern Icelandic said, let's stick a U in to make it a little more easy to pronounce. But that's sort of the quick way to be like, oh, am I looking at medieval or modern Icelandic? Quick way, see if you've got U's in front of the R's. There's other differences, obviously, many differences, but that's sort of like your quick rule of thumb. Which one am I looking at? So let's talk some more about some more accessible sources. So the Penguin Classics offers really affordable paperbacks of most Icelandic saga, including the giant book. Oh no! Okay, well, when I shoot, it's in the other room. So when I gave the talk, I gave it. It's this big giant paperback that's available for like £20, 25 euro, 25 American dollars. It's really, really affordable, and it's meant to be. It's been translated into smooth modern English, and it's annotated by top scholars. So the big book, the anthology, is the Sagas of Icelanders, edited by Arnolfur Thorsson and Bernard Scudder. Very easy to find. But you can also find individual ones, like this thing on the slide is Njal Saga. That's also published separately, because it's not in it, because Njal Saga is pretty big. So it's sort of the big one outside of the anthology. So that's easy to get to. You know, almost every bookshop is going to have it. You can, you know, get it online. It's very, very easy to find. But if you don't even have time to get to a physical copy of a book, the Icelandic Saga database, edited by Sveinbjörn Þórðarson, it's free to all, but it's kind of mixed quality, because most of the information that, or sorry, most of the translations that he has are what's the term, free copyright, because they're you know 100 years old. So if you want to read a 100-year-old translation of a saga, you know, there you go, cheap is free. You probably want to invest in a paperback, but it does work in a pinch. Another really comprehensive online source is heimskringla.no. But I don't know why it ends in .no, because it seems to be a Danish website. Most of it is written in Danish. You can find a lot of stuff in English, and, you know, I mean, it's Danish. It's not that difficult to kind of navigate your way around the website, even if you aren't familiar with Danish. But they're going to have a lot more of Iceland's Fornreet editions available, that sort of thing. You just kind of have to work your way around in Danish. Okay, so now let's, you know, stop with all the theoretical stuff and get down to the business of actual Old Norse literature and practice. So, Thorstein Statterstangerhags, the tale of Thorstein Staffstruck. So this is a very, very short tale, but it's an excellent introduction to the milieu of Icelandic literature. And the sagas are full of these interpersonal exchanges that hinge on reputation and honor, as well as increasing revenge and repercussions in defense of that honor. So the geological fact of there not being much arable land in Iceland meant that everybody lived in isolated farmsteads, mostly near the coast. Even today, the interior of Iceland is mostly uninhabitable. But within these farmsteads, you would have many people living and working there who would be unrelated. It wouldn't just be one single family. You'd have, you know, one family kind of running it, but then you'd have farmhands who could come and go as they needed. You know, slaves as well were part of the medieval Icelandic economy. So, you know, when we say farmstead, it's not just, you know, ma, pa, and their kids. It's sort of a little community in miniature. And I have to put the point, lots of people are named Thor something. So Old Norse names are often two elements put together, and Thor, you know, the god of thunder, the god of mankind, is very, very popular in Iceland. So that's why nearly everyone's name starts with Thor in this story. You know, it's not an editorial choice I would make nowadays, but I didn't write this saga, and the Icelanders who did record the saga, you know, knew a lot of people named Thor, so I guess to them it wasn't weird to have a bunch of people named Thor running around. So let's have some visual on this. So helpfully, Heimskringla actually provides a map that shows the two main settings of within the story. So there's Boðvarðsdal, Boðvarðsdale, dale meaning valley, and then just over a mountain range, or rather just around a snowy mountain range on Iceland, you have Sunnudal, Sunny Dale, Sunny Valley, and then upon or within Sunnydale, Sunnudal is Hof, the farmstead. So sometimes they say, you know, you from Sunnudal, you from Hof. It's basically the same thing. Hof is the farm itself. Sunnudal is the valley, and no one else lives in Sunnudal as far as we know. So if you're in Hof, you're in Sunnudal, vice versa. So Botharsdal is Thorin's house, and his son Thorstein, the titular character of the story, also lives there. Over in Sunnudal, though, there seems to be a lot more people living there. Bjarni is the main owner of the farm, and so we hear from his wife Ranveig. We have these farmhands, a woman and a man who are unnamed, and then we have Thorvald, Thorhall. More farmhands working for Bjarni. It's never actually said, but it seems like Bjarni functions as a gothi, which we'll talk about in a moment, particularly the fact that his farmstead is named Hof, which means temple, actually. So while it's not, you know, quite said outright, it seems that Bjarni functions, if not is himself, a leader, a religious as well as a political leader. Let me talk a little bit more about that. So Iceland was first settled in 874, and it functioned without a monarchy or military as a commonwealth all the way up until 1262. Pretty interesting stuff. So because of this, local wealthy men would assume power over their district. This was eventually formalized in what's called a Goðorð, but it began as a sort of might makes right thing. This idea that somebody who has a lot of land, somebody who has a lot of wealth, is going to have a lot of influence, is going to be able to raise men to fight for him. And so just kind of naturally, well, stuff about cultural capital and human interaction and stuff, you know, aside, it sort of seems to occur, well, without any outside influence, that the more power people had, the more power they could hold on to. And so gothi is the singular, gothar is the plural, and Goðorð is the name of the institution when it started to become something that was actually inheritable. And so a gothi, this big man on campus, big man in the valley, would be followed by thingmen. And they're called thingmen because the laws that existed were discussed and agreed to in a system of courts, but these were only accessible to the wealthy. And these courts would meet in what were called things or meetings. You'd have regional things, you'd have the quarters of Iceland would have things, and you'd also have the all thing, which is what it sounds like. It was sort of the big meeting place for everybody in Iceland. Well, everybody who could afford to travel. So, you know, theoretically, this is a very egalitarian system, but in practice, it's only the wealthy who are able to access these law courts. And then most importantly, particularly for the story, it was up to the prosecution to enforce the outcome of whatever the law court decided. So this is why when Thorstein is legally outlawed, it doesn't amount to anything because no one comes to enforce it. Either they sympathize with him, they're like, yeah, Thor started this conflict, Thorstein just finished it, you know, why is he getting punished for that? Or probably just more likely, Thorstein is a really scary guy. They don't want to fight him. They don't want to run up on his farm and say, hey, you're outlawed, get out of here. Because Thorstein is just going to kill them. It would not end well for them. So, you know, Icelandic Commonwealth, great idea in theory, not so much in practice. Because, you know, honor and reputation is a really important plot point here, as well as in other sagas. Murder in public, you know, it's scary. It's not a good thing, but at least everybody knows what's going on when you kill somebody and you're like, yeah, I killed that guy. You know, it's whether it's moral or not is up for debate, but it's at least out in public and everybody knows it. The real problem happens when there's murder in secret, when someone is killed or maimed or whatever, and then then no one claims for it. No one says, yes, I did that. That's when, you know, society really breaks down, when these things happen. So that's why Thorstein is actually outlawed, not so much for killing Fjord as for killing Thor in the stable and riding away. Whereas when he kills Thorhathel and Thorvald, and, you know, he ties them to the horses and sends them back to Bjarni, it's Bjarni's just sort of like, oh, I see. It's it's this principle that Thorstein, you know, proclaimed the murder of Thorhathel and Thorvald, that meant that it was less of a social problem than that killing Thord, telling the lady as he left, and then just riding away. You know, it's this concept of being hidden versus being on display. And so because of this, family honor is also really, really, really important. That's why Thorin, Thorstein's dad, not only provokes his son to seek revenge, but also why we have this almost black humor, we'll say, humorous scene of Bjarni coming into Thorin's deathbed, and Thorin, you know, this poor feeble guy on his deathbed trying to kill Bjarni with a sword. It's, you know, his family honor is very, very important to him. So, I mean, I've already kind of touched on this, but being an outlaw is the ultimate punishment available in Commonwealth Iceland, because the outlaw is not permitted any help that's otherwise required for guests or travelers. You know, because there's long distances between farmsteads, this could really make it life or death to not give somebody help if they need it. Also, outlaws can be killed or maimed without punishment or compensation. They are outside the law, so their family doesn't get to say, hey, you know, you killed my brother, but oh well, he was outlawed, so he was a legal non-entity. But as we've seen, when Thorstein is a very capable man, a very violent man, but thus a very independently protective of himself man, being an outlaw doesn't really matter that much, because dude's not going anywhere. Dude's fighting for his right to party, and so he just kind of keeps on living on his dad's farm despite legally being outlawed. So I just want to take a quick look at a paragraph out of Thorstein's, which I think is a good example of what I've been talking about. So this is Randveig, Bjarni's wife, talking to him. Remember, she's married to Bjarni, so his reputation is her reputation because they are a family together. These days, people say most often that they don't know what Thorstein Staffstruck will have to do before you find it necessary to take revenge, Hepna, that's what we saw before, on him. He has now slain 3 of your farmhands. Veit huskarla thina thria. Killed 3 of your farmhands. Your thingmen, that's where we just saw, thingmunem, do not think they can count on you for support as long as you leave this unavenged. Unavenged. Oh hepned. Unavenged, unrevenged. So basically, Randveig is saying, look, Bjarni, you know, you think you're such this hot guy, you know, we've named our house Hoff because you're basically a Gothi, acting like, you know, you're this big man that people can rely on you for protection. But our neighbor over in the other valley has now killed 3 of our household. You know, presumably 3 people dead is a pretty large percentage of a household, even if it's a big household. 3 people is a lot of people to be killed. And then the fact that Bjarni's done nothing but say he's outlawed, you know, it's Randveig saying basically, Bjarni, no one's taking you seriously, and people aren't going to be able to rely on you and give you defer to your power if you can't prove it. So we see over and over again, women, old men, people who are kind of outside of the masculine realms of being able to go out and fight for yourself, telling their husbands and brothers and sons and fathers, you must go and avenge our family honor. So this is Randveig telling Bjarni is a perfect example of this. So finally, I just want to finish this presentation talking about citing Icelandic authors, because this is something that it takes 2 minutes to learn how to do correctly, and it's really going to show a high level of professionalism and awareness if you do end up talking about Icelanders and citing Icelandic authors. So the really important thing is that Icelanders use patronymics, occasionally matronymics, but just for sake of argument, patronymics, which are not surnames. They are not surnames. So because of that, you refer to them using their first name or first names, even in brief. Never only use their patronymic. You would never call someone by just their patronymic. You would use either their entire name altogether or just their first name or first names, because many Icelanders use two first names, particularly if the first is very common. Jon Nar, fun guy, Einar Orn, etc. And so because you're not dealing with surnames, you're dealing with a full name altogether, you actually cite them and alphabetically arrange them in bibliographies by their first names. You never, ever, ever put their last name first. I'll give you an example of this. So this is just a piece of a bibliography I had. You can see Judith Jesh appears here. So, you know, she's not Icelandic, so Jesh, comma, Judith. Same with Elva Johnston, Eamon P. Kelly. In these cases, they have surnames, so you do what you're used to. You put the surname and then the comma and their first name or first names. Icelanders, though, you always go by their first name. So Johan Páll Arnason, Jon Vidar Sigurdsson, Jonas Christiansson, always use their full name, never shorten to just the patronymic. You even see that, in Johan Páll Arnason, you can see that the editor of that journal is also an Icelander. So again, instead of Olason, comma, Vestin, it's Vestin Olason. So just, you know, it's something to keep in mind where you're doing it. And if you get it wrong, don't worry, JSTOR has gotten it wrong too. You can see that this should be Jon Vidar Sigurdsson. And if they really want to shorten it, they could say Jon Vidar, but they should never just say Sigurdsson. It doesn't mean anything. But in JSTOR's defense, that's just their algorithm for shortening titles, because the very next name is Vini, but we Irish historians know that it should be Nivini, Mora Nivini. Nivini is the surname, just because Vini is the last part of it, you know, Nivini is the full surname. It's just an example of how, you know, knowing a little bit about a culture helps you to write about them in a fully informed sense. So that's the end of my presentation. I really hope this has been helpful to you. I hope this inspires you to at least look at the sagas for fun, but maybe start incorporating the sagas into whatever it is that you're working on. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.